All right, so in this decimal, we're going to be taking the fractions you see here, and we'll be writing those as decimals, okay? A couple of things to remember is when we refer to decimals, that when we call something by a tenth, that means 1 divided by 10. So it is going to be the first decimal place, as you see here. Now, if you think about 1/100th, as you see here, that's like taking the number 1 and dividing it by 100. So you would write it as 0.01 as a decimal or 1/100th as a fraction, okay? Then down here you see that we've got 1/1000, and that is taking 1 divided by 1,000, which is going to be a really small number, and that's going to be 0.001 written as a decimal. So I want you to notice that the tenths has 1 decimal place, hundredths has 2 decimal places, and thousands always has 3 decimal places. So let's practice this skill a little bit. All right, so notice we have 4 tenths. Now, because we have a tenth, that means we're going to have 1 decimal place, only 1 decimal place, and I only have 1 digit, so I'm going to write that as a 4. So that would be 4 tenths, and there are 0 whole numbers. All right, so let's take a look at the next one. We have 23 hundredths, and that's going to mean that we have 2 decimal places, so we're going to make sure we fill in both of those decimal places with the number 23. So that would be written as 23 hundredths, and we put a 0 in front. But what happens when you only have 1 digit, like 8 hundredths, when you don't have 2 digits like you did in 23? Well, a couple things to note is you want to make sure that it still reads as 8 hundredths. So we know we have 2 decimal places, so if I write the 8 here, that makes it 80 hundredths, and I don't want to have that. All right, so it is supposed to be read as 8 hundredths. So in order for it to be 8 hundredths, I'm going to have to put a 0 in front. Now I have to put the 0 in front, otherwise it doesn't have the place value of 100th. So notice I put the 0 in front, so I have 8 hundredths, and then I'm going to show that there are 0 whole numbers. All right, now let's go to 374 thousandths. So I know that there are going to be 3 decimal places because this is the thousandths place. So I've got 1, 2, 3 decimals. Now I only have 3 numbers because 374 is going to fit perfectly within those 3 slots, okay? And I have 0 whole numbers. But let's take a look at the next 2. They are also thousandths, but there's only 2 digits, 23 on the first one and 9 on the first one for the numerator. So I don't have a full set of 3, so how do we do that? It's very similar to the one we did up here where we had to make sure we put any extra spaces we fill in with zeros, but they need to be in front. All right, so let's take a look at this one. We know this is going to be thousandths, so I'm going to have 3 decimal places, and if I put the 23 here and I fill the 0 in there, it reads 230. And this clearly says 23, so I have to change it to where it reads 230. All right, so in order for it to say 23, I'm going to put Alt start at the end, and I put the last digit in the thousandths place. Then I put the 2, and now it reads 23, but I have to fill in the extra place value spot for the tenths with a 0. That way my last digit is in the thousandths place, okay? And then I have 0 whole numbers. All right, so let's take a look at this last one, 9 1/1000ths. So think about that for a moment. Where would you put the 9? So let's draw it out. We've got 3 decimal places because we're talking about a thousandths. So where would we put that 9? If we put it in the first slot, it would say 900. If we put it in the second slot, it would say 90. So we are going to put it in that last slot, but here's where you have to remember. We have to fill in those extra place values with zeros, so the 9 will be in the thousandths place. And then we have 0 whole numbers.